So we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? Thank you kindly. Into the fours, 4.1, consolidated financial statements and trust fund financial statements. Mr. Fudge, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pleased tonight to present our 2018 draft audited consolidated financial statements. You'll see in your package not only the consolidated financial statements. Oh, thank you. I saw red, I thought I was on.
Yeah, me too.
In the package, you'll not only see the consolidated audited statements for the city, you'll also see our trust fund statements, which are also audited. You'll also see a special purpose audit, which is an audit of the Trade and Convention Center, which is revenue and expenses. Again, a schedule to our audit, all part of the audit that Deloitte does for us. So today we have from the firm of Deloitte, Mr. Stephen Lund, who's the partner of Deloitte, and also the senior audit manager, Jeremy Millay. They'll go through their audit report, their audit findings, and then subsequent to that, if the Finance Committee wishes, staff could leave the room for discussion with the auditors. And then beyond that, we'll have a very short presentation by staff with respect to the results of 2018. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Lund.
Jeremy and I will co-present this, if that's okay. My name is Steve Lund.
Yeah, just hit the green
Please.
sticker. There you go. Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us here. My name is Steve Lund, partner with Deloitte. I would have signed the audit report last year, and I'll be signing the audit report this year. Jeremy, who is the heart and soul of the team, and he's been on the audit for a good 7-8 years now, so he knows the file and the folks really well. Will take us through the details of the report, but at a high level, I'm comfortable that we're going to be in position to sign the report, an unmodified report, with no uncorrected misstatements. And as a general comment, I'd like to thank management for being very transparent, open, and honest as an auditor. I do a ton of these things for various companies of various sizes, and you get a bit of a gut feel when you're dealing with accounting teams. And in this case, I always felt like they wanted to do the right thing versus the convenient thing. And so I'm quite happy from that perspective. So Jeremy, if you want to walk through the details of this report, and then I can talk to the audit report.
Excellent.
We're rocking and rolling.
All right, so if everyone has the report in front of them, we will go right to page 1, our audit explained. So this page is simply a summary of our audit scope and our terms of engagement, which are consistent year over year. It simply states that we are presenting, we performed our audit under public sector accounting standards in accordance with Canadian generally accepted audit standards as well. And the terms of our condition of our engagement haven't changed since the date of our engagement letter. Materiality for the current year is up slightly over 2017 from 6.5 to 6.9. We do bring to the attention that although this is our materiality number, we would report any errors, any uncorrected misstatements that are 5% of that number. So it's not the 6.9, it'd be 5% of that, in fact, that you would be aware of if there were any differences or uncorrected issues. Significant audit risks we will discuss a little bit later. And our audit fees are consistent with the financial proposal that we presented based on our proposal in September. So no changes there. Page 2 shows the status and outstanding matters. So we have a few items before we can provide the signed engagement or signed audit report, approval of council, finalization of quality assurance, signed management rep letter. So nothing of concern, nothing that's out of the ordinary, but there are some items that need to be finalized. Going concern is obviously not a concern for the city. Currently, business insights. We do a internal control as part of our audit. We didn't identify any significant areas where there were issues or concerns. If there were, you would be made aware of it in this report as well. No uncorrected misstatements or significant disclosures either that need to be brought to to your attention. So overall, a very, very clean process this year. Page 3. So page 3, the first part of it, I guess, would be the fraud risk. So I will pause here and just ask if there's any instances of fraud that anybody's aware of, just to bring it to our attention. We weren't aware of any for the current year, but just this time I'd like to take that little pause. Hearing none. Perfect. Significant audit practice, judgments, and estimates are consistent year over year, no changes there. We remain independent. We have taken on a bigger piece of the city's mandates. However, we continue to maintain our independence through this process. And finally, as mentioned, we will be in a position to provide our report in accordance with Canadian Gas and with our financial statements prepared under public sector accounting standards. Page 4, page 5, and page 6 are our significant audit risks. So we have 3 significant audit risks in the current year, 2 of which are presumed fraud audit risks, so they are not they're not specific, I guess, to the city. They are present in all of our financial statement audits. The first being management override. It's simply the fact that management is in a unique position to perpetrate fraud if they so chose to do it with their position, and as a result, we perform certain tests such as journal entry testing, fraud inquiry, and different tests that allow us to gain comfort over the management override, and we do have satisfaction over our procedures. The second significant audit risk, is the presumed risk of fraud on property taxes, unconditional grants, and utility revenue. So that is, again, same idea. Management is in a position to perpetrate fraud. Revenue would be, is always a hot topic. So it is a presumed fraud risk in all of our audits. Our procedures, our substantive testing allowed us to gain comfort over, and we are satisfied with our audit procedures that there are no material misstatements within that balance. And finally is the complex and non-routine consolidation entries for controlled entities. So there are a significant amount of ABCs that get brought up into the consolidated statements, which is quite a complex procedure, a lot of moving pieces. So we do take a closer eye on that. And again, no issues were noted during our testing in the current year. So on page 7, these are just a few reportable matters. I won't go through all of them. We will note that we have no changes to our audit plan that we had planned on performing, so no issues there. We did use our actuarial experts who were connected with your actuarial experts, and that process we do every once in a while just to ensure that the assumptions used, that the numbers used are all correct, and so that was something that we'll continue to do over the course of our relationship in the next few years. And then I guess the other piece that I like to highlight is just to make sure that there's no post-balance sheet events as of today that anybody's aware that would materially affect the financial statements. Perfect. Page 8 in the current year is actually a little bit different than what you would have seen in the past, where there was a proposal that went out, and Deloitte is now doing a significant number of the entities under this banner. So the procedure this year was a lot smoother, a lot simpler, because obviously we have a line of sight into many of the ABCs that are currently under the consolidated entity. So again, a little bit different. However, we still need to assess the significance of these entities and whether whether the consolidated financial statements need to stand alone, obviously, on their own as well. So just wanted to point that out. Page 9 and 10 are simply communication requirements that we are required to communicate to you, and we have done so throughout the year, and we will continue to do so throughout the relationship of any items that might come up throughout the year, as well as our presentation of this audit results as an example of items that we are required to present to you. I will pause there and just ask if there's any questions, and then we'll go on to the auditor's report.
Any questions for the presenters?
Perfect. I'll pass it on to Steve.
Perfect. Thank you. So as scintillating of an audit thing that can happen, this is this audit report right here, because it's changed for the first time in a really long time, and it's not a City of Saint John thing, it's an audit standards thing. Canada continues to move along the curve with the international standard setters, and so they've mandated a change, and so that's now trickled into Canada. And so for the first time ever, for these set of financials, you'll see it in this format. And the highlights of the difference are in the past you would have seen a summary of the responsibilities and the scope at the beginning, and then the opinion comes at the very bottom. So it forces everyone to read all that stuff first. In this case, we jump right to the chase, and so the opinion is first, followed by the base of the opinion and all the responsibilities and so on. You'll notice that the wording is different, it's a little longer. Generally, our audit is performed in the same way, but this is just a more robust and effective way to communicate our opinion. So just wanted to raise that to everyone's attention if they were curious to why it was significantly different than last year. And then finally, Appendix 3 is just for those in the room, if you want to bone up on any governance matters or other items like that. Deloitte's got chock full of information, so feel free to take a read at your leisure. That takes us to the end of this report. It is designed in a way that it enables council, boards, anything like that to satisfy their governance responsibilities, so that so a lot of the checklist items that you would have seen in Appendix 1 ensure that that you're covering your responsibilities as well. So I'll pause there, and Jeremy and I are more than happy to take any questions.
Any questions for the presenters? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I guess, you know, from my perspective at least, I mean, we're really relying on your obligations, your expertise, and listening carefully and reading the documents to say, you know, are you concerned? And we're not hearing that. You know, we're hearing that you're pleased. You're hearing about, you know, cooperation. You know, I'm not sure you said the word competency, but you know that there's competency here. Thanks. So thumbs up indicates competency. You know, I came from the private sector. We had annual audits. Our teams would be nervous, not nervous in a bad way, but just it's a big deal.
Yep.
You know, the auditors are there. They're going to ask their questions. They're going to push the team. They're going to ask for boxes and boxes and boxes of information. And you know, when that clean bill of health came back, like this one is coming back, you know, our folks were very proud and very pleased. And there was, you know, homework. And I guess that's what I'm anticipating that has gone on here. That you know, again, your firm's reputation, not only that, but also your obligation as professionals would say that you come in regardless of what you think or who you might know, and you do a job that you're required to do. And the City of Saint John is getting a very clean bill of health here in terms of the audit results. Is that a fair, you know, a very high level, non-accounting layman's overview of what you found here?
Yeah, very fair. Very fair. We've got to go through a process. And as one of the biggest firms in the world, Deloitte doesn't allow us to go rogue in any way. We've got quality assurance processes that are independent from the local folks like us. And so even if we wanted to, we wouldn't be able to deviate from that. So we go through quite a robust process, and management very much respects that process.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments? Has anyone ever heard an accountant use the word rogue?
Maybe nervous.
Made me a little nervous too. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, very much.
Perfect. Thank you.
For your presentation. I need a motion to take this to open and council. That's what we're going to do. Finance. Yeah. I think the Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Norton. All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed. All right. Do we?
We do have a short presentation on the actual results of the finance. Oops, sorry, hit my button here. We do have a short presentation on the actual financial results for 2018 that Hillary is prepared to provide. I'll leave it to the finance committee on whether they want to see that presentation.
Yeah, I think so. It's been keyed up. Let's see it, please. Thank you.
Under what tab, Commissioner?
Should be under tab 4.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Today, probably my last chance to present the consolidated financial statement to the Finance Committee. So I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Finance Committee for the significant achievement you've made to date. Over the last several years, what I've witnessed is this committee has made, all the right decisions, from strengthening governance by approving fiscal financial policies to paying down debt, to putting any surplus money we have in the reserve to pay down capital, or to pay capital, or to pay down debt. So everything you've done so far has been right. And I think your decision put the city on a sustainable path. And for that, I want to say thank you to each of you for that. So thank you so much. So I'd like to focus on the topic I think you're all exciting about. It's the consolidated financial statements.
Hold on, I'm not allowed to bring popcorn tonight, but
Yeah, I'm
very
gonna go really fast. As you know, we are required to follow public sector accounting standards. One thing I just want to mention is the way we budget versus the way we report back are different. So I think we talked about that before. I'm not going to explain it more, but how we budget versus how we report on a consolidated basis are just different. We have 15 entities under our control now. We used to have 17. Last year, we kind of combined Saint John Development Corporation and Saint John Industrial Park. So now we have developed Saint John. And then we no longer control Saint John Nonprofit Housing. So now we have 15 entities altogether. Like Mr. Lund kind of explained, we have clean audit opinion. In terms of the fund results, on the general fund side, we actually had a small surplus. We used to have, we had 41,000 surplus, but the province decided to claw back $161,000 from their financial assistance money, the New Deal money. So that's why we end up with 119,000 deficit. It's considered on budget. And then utility fund, we have a small surplus of $51,000. In terms of achievement, I think the key takeaway here is we reduced general fund debt by $5.5 million. So the balance now we have $106 million compared to $112 million last year. We end up, both funds, we are on budget. We made significant investment in our assets. And as you can see, we about $152 million. And the majority of that is in the safe cleaning drinking water project. And also we make significant increase to operating as well as capital reserve, and it was on note 19 of the consolidated financial statements. So I'm not going to go for that. Statement of changes in net debt. And as you can see, there's a significant increase in net debt. Now, I don't think you should be overly concerned about this because it's about timing. So in 2018, even though we haven't paid the contractor the substantial completion payment for the P3 projects, but we already recognize the assets on our book. So there was a significant amount of accrual to be paid, I think, in the very near future. So that's why you see a significant jump in our liability. Financial assets, I think the only thing that I want to mention is we still have a lot of cash. At the end of the year, we still have a lot of cash. And investment in GIC because we haven't made that final substantial completion payment. So that's why we're still holding on to cash at the end of 2018. And instead of, and also investment in energy services, which is Saint John Energy. On their statement, they reported about 21 million surplus, but keep in mind of that, 15.7 is really unrealized actuarial gain from the employee benefit program, so it's unrealized gain. So financial liability, I mentioned the accrual payable. Revenue, I think as you can see this year, we had $4.56 million. And that is a combined money from the New Deal agreement, about $3.4 million, and another $1.2 million coming from the one-time financial assistance from the province. So we will, last year we didn't have that money. So, in terms of expenses, everything's kind of consistent with the prior year. The only thing you can see under general government services, there's a big jump in there, and the reason being, for accounting purposes, some of the capital expenditures, if they don't meet the definition of a tangible capital asset, we have to expense them. So there's about $7 million that we actually expense. And also, when we dispose of the capital assets, there's a lot on disposal. So these are the accounting laws. So result, again, we have clean audit opinion. I touch on we reduce debt, we increase investment in reserve, and also I think going forward, in order to, I think we are on the right path. We have to, in order to focus on investing in our assets and everything, we have to consider other funding options other than borrowing. I think we need to look at pay-as-you-go and reserve. These are the options. And we are working actively on a 10-year long-term financial plan. We are waiting on the province for some final information. And I think that hopefully by the end of this year, we would be able to deliver that. And I think that is something that is very important to this committee, I think. So in terms of recommendation, I'd like this committee to recommend that you approve the draft consolidated financial statement and the trust fund statements, and that we refer these statements to council for final approval.
I'll make that motion,
So,
Mr. Chairman.
thank you very kindly. Someone made the motion, Councillor Sullivan seconded. Thank you. Any questions for Hillary? Any comments?
Just a quick comment, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely.
So thanks very much, Hillary, for the presentation. Much like Mr. Yamin can make energy management and assets sound so incredibly riveting, you can do the same with your presentation. Thank you very much. Just reflecting on a couple things. First of all, start with your compliment to this committee, but that doesn't happen without the commitment and the dedication and the great advice coming from the finance team as a whole. So I really just to thank you, to the commissioner, to you, to everyone else that's working in the finance department. I'm really grateful, frankly, for the leadership and the stewardship, if you will, to inform and help this committee and frankly all of council. So I'm very proud of the group. I think despite some of the financial headwinds and challenges that we've faced, we've also showed tremendous discipline to continue to pay down, for example, debt, to create reserves, and it would be probably quite easy to just take the pedal off, the foot off the pedal and say, okay, we're not going to pay any debt down this year, and really, if you will, monkey around with our numbers, and that would have been the wrong thing to do. So I'm really proud of council as well, and for not doing that, and as you said, Hillary, strengthening governance, reserves, putting new policies in place. I'm very excited about the long-term financial plan. And then lastly, I'd just say that I think we often get unfairly compared to other communities, maybe even just in our region here, and there's no comparison. This is a $250 million organization that faces significantly different challenges. So again, just for context, I mean, we're a $250 million organization that gets compared to a $20 million organization, and it's a completely unfair comparison. So I'll end with a thank you for everyone's, the commissioner and yourself, Hillary, and wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councillor Reardon.
Yeah, there we go. Hillary, I want to also say thank you as well, and to Kevin, to you and your team. This is my second round on finance, and in my last term, we had Commissioner Fudge take over, but we also took over with the public sector accounting standards, so the crew was working day and night in my last term on the finance committee, and now this council has come up with all these strengthening policies. So the team's been in the long-term financial plan. So the team's been working again, hard. So it's been great. We've seen a lot of movement, I think, since since I've been sitting on council, since 2012, just to see it morph over these last 7 years. So I really do appreciate all of the work that's gone into it. And I know there's been a lot of late nights. I'm sure Kevin's lost a few hair over it, pulling them out at night. Lost a bit of sleep, but I'm very comfortable where we are, I guess. I feel us on that sustainability path, and I'm comfortable where we are. And I have a lot of faith in the team, so I just want to say thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? All right, let me just, let me echo some of those comments. First of all, Harry, thank you very kindly for your kind remarks earlier. It is, the mayor's right, it's about the team, and you guys have a marvelous team. Some of you might not know, but Hillary's going to leave us. She's moving on to bigger and better things, but she's not going to be here. We're going to miss her and her input. Been a great part of the team, sincerely.
Thank you.
You and the team, headed by Kevin, I don't think we would be where we're at. You've taught us, put policies into place. We're going to talk about a 2-year plan in a minute here, and then we're going to talk about a 10-year plan by the end of the year. These are things that the city, which is so far away of when I first joined council. So it's folks like you that got us here. Thank you so much.
And thank you. Without, the mayor, you and other members of the team as champion of the cause, you talk about that, on your Facebook Live, on so many things. So, so that's why the message get out, and I think that's why, without you, each of you being the champion, I don't think we can get where we are today. So, yeah, that's.
So there's a motion? All those in favor? And those opposed? Thank you very kindly.
Despite all these headwinds, I just feel fantastic.
State of the infrastructure report. Can you pick that up for me as well, please?
Sure, I'll kick this off. So tonight's the second iteration of the State of the Infrastructure Report. As we mentioned when we first introduced this as part of our asset management program, this is not a project that starts and ends. This is a new way, it's a culture change, a new way of doing business, introducing evidence-based data in order to make our decisions, and you'll see that in the next presentation after this with respect to the 2-year capital program. So with that, this evening we have from RV Anderson, Mr. Hans Ariz, and our asset management manager, Samir Yamin. They've got a short presentation to provide with respect to the results of this iteration.
Thank you, Mr. Fudge. Before I hand it over to Mr. Hans Aris from RV Anderson, I just want to talk about a couple of slices here. First, I just want to emphasize the importance of presenting the state of the infrastructure report, which we call it the SOTI report. And the purpose and the main purposes for this report here is to be able to communicate to the public, to the staff, and the council on how the capital investment we require here to continue maintaining the current level of our services here is very important. And also we need for the public to understand, based on evidence-based data, there's where the money we need to invest, what area we need to invest it here, when do we need to replace our asset, why we need to replace this asset, how much money is costing us, what are the risks if we don't replace this asset, on the level of service, on our financial input here. And also this report can be used also to plan for our capital budget in the next 1-2 years and so on. So the data or the report, we try to use this report as evidence-based data to help us to make a decision on that. I just want to second mention is how did we develop this SOTI report here. And just to show you a flow diagram here, how the data is flowing. I'm an engineer. I like structure things. I like to see everything structured, and that's the way I like it. So ideally, we should have an asset management system. And we're working with Stephanie's team on that here. Ideally, all the information will be taken from the asset management system. We'll be able to do the SOTI report. Everybody will be able to see where the data is spending, how we're doing our asset, our infrastructure, all this here. But currently we don't have it, and we're working on this here. The way now we're doing is on the SOTI report, what we did here in the last year, actually, be honest with you, is the city staff teamwork has been really diligently working in order for them to improve their data. I mean, St. John Water has been working hard, trying to get the data accuracy increased. Same thing with the transportation, same thing with our building. And also working with RV Anderson on this here, we'll be able to develop a data structure template to help us to gather our data. We'll be able to develop the risk, the condition framework. We'll be able to assign risk and condition on our asset to determine when we need to replace this asset. So when we develop this report, it does not come easy. We did make significant change compared to the last year. So we have improved our data. Yes, we did improve our data accuracy, but we're still not there yet. So, and I know, Hans, we're going to talk about that and data accuracy later on. But we are moving in this direction, and hopefully we can keep improving our data to make sure in the end of the day that we can rely 100% on our SOTI report to make decision based, to develop our long-term financial plan as you see it in the plan here, and we can understand the cost of service we need to do in order to provide the level of service. Then we can start making the fund decision. How can we be able to maintain our sustainable level of service the way we want it? And this is the important part here. So there was a lot of information, a lot of work being done on here to develop the SOTI report. And then Mr. Hans Harris is going to talk about the result. We're going to show us for each asset how we're going to do this. And after this, we can have any question and answer on that. So please, thank you.
Thank you, Samir. I'll try to live up to the expectations of Mayor Darling to try to make this a riveting presentation. So here we go. Right. So before we get into the meat and potatoes, a few changes, as Samir alluded to, between the 2016 State of the Infrastructure Report and the 2018 State of the Infrastructure Report. The first was the asset hierarchy, the way that we organize the various assets, infrastructure assets that the city owns. We reorganized that slightly. That was due to the fact that we now have better data to work with. However, the overall fundamentals remain the same. The next thing is that the basis of the inventory, or the basis that underlies the report in 2016, it was the tangible capital asset inventory from the finance department solely as a source of information. For this current version, we've really gotten into the weeds, as Samir mentioned. St. John Water, Transportation and Environment, all the departments have worked hard to work with real on-the-ground data rather than financial data. So the level of detail and reliability has increased fairly significantly. The other thing that we've done in the 2016 report, the replacement cost for the assets were basically we took the original acquisition cost and inflated those out using the consumer price index, which is approximate. For the current version of the report, we actually got hard data from recent contracts of paving, laying water main, etc., from the various departments, so the data is far more precise in that point, right? And the last change was the estimated useful lives. In the 2016 report, we basically took the assets to be spent and needed to be replaced when the asset was fully amortized. The finance department likes to be slightly conservative on that. So for the current report, I think we've had a lot of back and forth with staff based on their experience, based on industry references, as well as still some amortization periods. But we are confident that we have a better handle that the data that we have now is again more accurate. So the other thing that I'd like to touch on is the interpretation of the report. We have a far more nuanced understanding of where we are with regards to asset management, where we are with the state of the infrastructure on the city's infrastructure assets. We're throwing some new terms out there and some new numbers. However, I want to make sure that they're interpreted correctly. So we're talking about infrastructure deficit, and the definition for that is that would be the infrastructure that is theoretically at the end of its useful life and should have been replaced in the past or should be replaced now. That is not directly related to condition. Generally speaking, that is correct. However, we got some very old assets that theoretically should have been completely used up. However, once we put some actual eyeballs on it, we're going to say, geez, that water transmission main, which is very expensive to replace, should have been done. It's still in great shape, and we can make that last quite a bit longer, right? So anyway, just a word of caution there when you interpret the data, right? The other word of caution, I guess, is that the results are based on the default level of service. We're not to a point where we have that explicitly defined. We've basically assumed that the city wishes to continue to operate the way it has in the past. That may change once we get under the hood and say, listen, we may want to increase the level of service in one area. A good example there would be the Saint John water. The Safe Clean Drinking Water program, that really improves the quality and the reliability of your water system, and there was a drastic increase in the level of service. We haven't got there yet with a lot of the other services that the city provides. Right? The other limiting factor, I guess, on the interpretation of the report is that it's based on the existing assets that the city owns. So there's no allowances for either growth or shrinkage, right? And the third and final assumption is that the quality of construction is uniform for all your assets. Not every water main was constructed with the same quality of care. Not every road's got the same amount of base and sub-base underneath it, right? So it's a bit of a blind spot as well. The investment priority, there's going to be a tendency for people reading the report. They're going to say, oh, geez, we want to make the infrastructure deficit. We're going to get that to zero. We want to eliminate all risk on all the assets. I would caution you on making those assumptions. Ideally, the investment priority should be a balance between managing risk, setting the optimum level of service, and minimizing the life cycle cost for your assets. So, reducing the life cycle cost may increase the risk slightly. However, there may be an acceptable balance or trade-off there. So I would caution you not to focus on any one of those to the exclusion of the other two. Right? And the final word of caution is that the data quality, even though it's drastically better for the 2018 report, it's still not perfect and never will be. So there's still a few blind spots there. Anyway, with that preamble, let's get down to the meat and potatoes. For the city as a whole, the replacement value for all the assets is $2.7 billion with an infrastructure deficit of $435 million, which compares quite closely to the numbers that we had last year, although the replacement value increased by $600 million. So, we found, quote unquote, $600 million worth of additional assets. Right, the letter grade is a C+, and the trending on that based on the projected funding that we see in the future is decreasing. So that, there's still some room for concern there, right? We've got that broken down by growth and community development, public safety, transportation and environment services, Saint John water, and corporate finance and administrative services. Some variation in the letter grades there, but they tend to range from a C- to a B+, which is not bad. There's room for improvement there. Right? The condition of the assets would be the colored pie chart at the bottom there. We have a very large percentage of the assets are in very good shape, and we do have some very poor assets as well. However, they're a relatively small piece of the pie. The distribution as a whole is not atypical for Canadian municipalities, and I'd say you're probably a little bit ahead in some areas and a little bit behind in others, but all in all, not bad. Right? The bubble chart we got in the lower left is a representation of how much investment requirement is coming at you. So we basically have that projected out over the next 10 years. The size of the bubble represents the size of the investment. And on the left-hand side of the graph, that is right now. On the right-hand side of the graph is 10 years out. And we can see that the assets that you want to pay attention to would be the assets in the upper left-hand quarter, where we get said, listen, it's now or in the near future, plus these are the high-risk assets, right? So again, that distribution is not atypical for Canadian municipalities. You got some assets that are fairly high risk. However, I caution you there that, listen, some of that's still based on theoretical information. And one of the things that the various departments are doing, are working on right now, is to put some actual eyeballs on that. They're going to say, listen, is that a true representation or are we overstating the case here, right? This would be the investment profile for the city of Saint John. The bars that we have there are the investment requirements broken down by decade. The first bar is the infrastructure deficit, so that's the assets that theoretically should have been replaced. And as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at $435 million of investment requirement, that would be considered immediate. We've got that broken down by risk classes as well. So we've got the top bar there in the, or the top piece of the bar in bright red would be the what we call extreme high risk assets. So that we should take a look at those first, followed by high risk, and as you go down in the other colors, that would decrease. The sustainable funding requirement is, I can't quite see it. Get my glasses on, yeah. Yeah, 59, so about $60 million per year. The projected funding going forward is $26 million. So we're only funding about 40% of what you theoretically should. Bit of saving grace there when you take a look at the first two bars that we have on the graph there, 2020 to 2029. The demand matches your projected funding quite closely. The next decade out, it starts to run away from you a little bit, right? So I think the interpretation there is that even though we do have a high infrastructure deficit and your numbers are not out of control when compared to other municipalities, you do have a bit of breathing room to kind of get your legs under you. And, I'm very encouraged by, both the, the audit report that we saw earlier, the financial report that Hillary presented. I think you're on the right track to get your arms around that and start to deal with that. We can break these numbers down into the general fund and the St. John Water Fund as well. So for the general fund, the replacement value of the assets, $1.3 billion. So further to Mayor Darling's statements, listen, this is not a mom and pop operation. We're a multi-billion-dollar enterprise here, right? The infrastructure deficit for the general fund is $121 million. The letter grade is B, but again, we're trending down. As you can see, the condition chart at the bottom there, was not looking all that bad. A lot of green and yellow, a bit of red, and some unknowns, but generally not in bad shape. And there's the sustainable funding requirement for the general fund. So a deficit, as I mentioned, $121 million. The sustainable funding requirement, $34.6 million per year, and the projected funding is about 18.5. So again, you're about half of where you should be. Right? The picture for St. John Water, broken down by the various assets that we have there. Replacement value $1.4 billion with an infrastructure deficit of 313 and change. Letter grade of C+, but again trending down quite steeply as well. Condition ratings for that, the transmission mains that were handed over to the city as part of the Safe Clean Drinking Water are included in the inventory. The water treatment plant is not, because it is operated by the P3 operator for the next several decades, right? So that's not included on the books. Sustainable funding requirement be $25.3 million per year, and we're projecting over the next few years $7.5 million per year. I think that's a little distorted due to the fact that the city really spent a lot of money on the Safe Clean Drinking Water program in the last few years, and looking at a bit of a austerity period for the next few years. However, over time, that'll come up, that $7.5 million, fairly drastically. So, in conclusion, and this is very high level, and I went through it very quickly. The report that's all in your package has got a tremendous amount of detail broken down by department and by service. So you can bore into that at your leisure. But generally speaking, the conclusions, I'd say interpret the results cautiously. The data confidence is high. It's significantly better than the 2016 report. However, the data completeness is very high. However, the accuracy is still moderate. So we got a much better handle on the amount of stuff that we own. However, the condition of that stuff and what shape it's in, we're still not quite where we'd like to be, right? So that's still a work in progress, right? A A lot of work was done by city staff here, so the condition and risk assessments have been updated, the replacement values and estimated useful lives have been updated, so we get a lot more confidence in that. The other thing that staff has done, and they should be commended on this, there was a tremendous amount of data fragmentation, where it was like little spreadsheets and little bits and pieces of data all over the place. I think we got that pulled into a small number of large piles. A lot of data is now stored in the GIS. You know, the micropaver system is going to get sucked into that, and the tangible capital asset inventory is now integrated with the data inventory as well. So, you know, kudos to staff for pulling that off. Total value of the current asset inventory, $2.7 billion with a $435 million deficit, and $579 million of replacement cost in the next decade. Right? So, you know, those are big numbers. However, I think based on the financial shape of the city, that is manageable. Right? The underfunding of the infrastructure assets, you're only funding about 43% of what you theoretically should be funding, so that's not a good number. However, you got a decade or so to deal with that, and based on what I saw earlier, I think you're well on your way to getting that under control. There are $97.3 million of assets in the extreme risk category. One word of caution there is some assets can never be in the extreme risk category. It's basically a cross product between how likely is it that the asset is going to fail in the near future and what is the consequence of that failure. So a water transmission line would be an extreme consequence, whereas a piece of road or a sidewalk, the consequence can never be that high, so it will never be an extreme risk, right? So, you know, so that category is not complete, and I'd say a lot of that still has to be vetted with actual inspections, you know, on the ground, right? But it is, however, something to keep an eye on. Okay, the infrastructure score is B, and it's in a generally in a good to fair condition, which I think is encouraging. In short, I'd say the infrastructure requires attention. You know, it's approaching a bit of a cliff and does require corrective action. For those of you that were in attendance during the last presentation that I gave in 2016, I had this particular graphic up to kind of say, listen, this is kind of, you know, the message that I'd like to send. You know, based on the updated and improved data and results for 2018, I think the car has backed up a little bit, and, you know, we're still at the cliff, but we're not hanging over the edge, right? So. Comparison of how the 2016 and 2018 numbers, you know, compare to each other rather than the simple car on the cliff analogy. There's some numbers for your perusal there. So I'd say that, you know, generally speaking, I'd say the city is in better shape. You know, with the better quality data that we have now, I think the confidence is that, you know, listen, we're doing okay, is increasing, which is encouraging. You know, the general interpretation of the report, I'd say, is that the St. John infrastructure condition is not atypical. However, it's not sustainable either. Like, you're underfunding, you know, you're only funding your investment requirements by 43%. You can't keep that up for very long. That's going to catch up with you, right? However, you know, you are no worse off than the vast majority of other municipalities in Canada. And I am very encouraged by the fact that, listen, this is on your radar. You're dealing with it. And you know, I'm confident that, you know, what I see from staff, and you know, I've been interacting with them for through Samir for over 2 years now. I think you get a great team, and I think everybody's on the same page, you know, which is not necessarily a given in asset management. The 2016 and 2018 report set baseline for future comparison, right? So as Samir mentioned, it's a great communication tool. The picture is clear. We have better quality data. However, it's not yet complete. You know, the other thing that would be a main takeaway is I'd say heed the results, you know, and improve and maintain the data quality. Like as Samir mentioned, this is evidence-based information that we're communicating to the public. Staff have done a great job in improving the quality of the data, and I would encourage you to keep that up. You know, if we take our foot off the gas there, the reliability and the confidence in the reports that we're going to generate in the future will decrease and diminish. Right? I would improve, and these are the things that we are working on, the workflow processes, that we use to manage the assets and do the financial projections. Data management and software is another big initiative. We will be rolling out the recommendations for an asset management software system to now manage and maintain the data that we have collected and simplify the processes to do your financial projections and do your budgeting, et cetera. And last but not least, we'll come up with some performance metrics. One, we got our legs underneath us from a data management point of view. I think it's important that you have the ability to track how you're doing and compare yourself to other municipalities, right? So that'll be the last piece that we're rolling out, and that'll be towards the end of this year and early next year. And last, but definitely not least, kudos to staff for the progress to date. I think they've done an absolutely fabulous job in moving the yardsticks on this. The clarity of the picture, the reliability of the information that you use to make your decisions has increased by leaps and bounds, and I think that's just fundamental in doing a proper job managing such a large enterprise. All right, this is the report card, and I would encourage you to make the SODI report available to the general public. It's just basically letter grades for every service you provide. I think it's easy to understand in the report, and it's to be on page 1 of the report. Right? The other thing that I would encourage you to stress is basically a comparison of what it means to the average household in St. John. When we talk about $2.7 billion worth of asset values, I can't visualize what that would look like. However, when we break the investment requirements down, and we've had, again, some very large multi-million-dollar investment requirements for the various services, when you compare that to your daily cup of coffee or your cell phone bill or your utility bill, etc., we take a look at the water and wastewater investment requirements. We're looking at about $60 per household in St. John per month. And that would be fully funded. Right now, mind you, that's the capital piece of it. The operational piece would be over and above that. For the general fund, you'd be looking at, and again, I don't have my glasses on, but that's, $85 a month, right? When you compare that to your cable bill or your internet bill or your daily cup of coffee, etc., these numbers are not completely out of the realm of the possible, right? So, again, this might be a good communication tool to kind of communicate those results to the general public. They're going to say, listen, it's not impossible to deal with this. The report, as I mentioned, goes into a tremendous amount of detail by service area and by department. Again, it's all in there, and it's for your reading pleasure, I guess. And with that, I think that would conclude my presentation. I'd be happy to entertain any questions if there are any.
Any questions? Any comments? Your Worship? Some rapid fire.
Sorry, I know some folks need to leave. So thanks. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I think we've upped. I typically talk about $2 billion in assets. So again, I think it speaks to the scale of St. John, $2.7 billion in assets. Is it a fair assumption that as we continue to work on quality control, specifications and so on, those can have an influence on? So obviously if you're having ongoing, hypothetically, quality control issues, then obviously that's going to lower your letter grade in the quality of your asset. Is that, I just, as you're doing your presentation, I was just thinking about how important quality control management, innovating, testing specifications could be to the overall quality of your overall asset picture. Is that fair to say?
I think that's a fair statement.
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't take my thought any further. I just sort of reflecting on quality, right? So, yeah, again, so just rapid fire, I guess, $2.7 billion, and again, the impacts of and the uses of these assets and who pays. So that's a conversation we've continued to have for many years. I think that for me, as I'm reflecting here, we're going to continue to need to have very strong provincial federal partnerships. We can't, we rely heavily on the federal government, gas tax funds and other funds in the province to help us fund these investments in the future. So that will need to continue. I think the discipline that Hillary spoke about earlier is going to be critical as councils pass batons to future councils. Talking to Mayor O'Brien, he would really be incredibly grateful to. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, but councils and mayors 20 years ago who put very long-term thinking and plans in place. So the legacy that this council and future councils can leave is those disciplined long-term plans and just pass the baton. Perhaps we should have that that ceremony where the mayor actually passes a baton on to the next mayor. I think that the story could. Certainly $435 million is a huge number, but I wrote down in each of your two graphs either very good or good, 67%, and the second was 71%. I think that's an important narrative, that there's some clouds and the car's not quite over the cliff, but that's a very positive reframe of the sky is falling. I mean, we have a lot of work to do on our infrastructure, but we've invested $300 million alone in wastewater and clean water in the last decade and a bit. No one else can tell that story. I think growth, it's critical as well that we accelerate growth, because we'll be able to advance our investments in infrastructure if our tax-based growth is increased, and so we're working both sides of the ledger. Discipline I already talked about. And just again, I just want to tie it how critically important it is for ours and other cities' success in the future to get the types of municipal reforms as well that we've been talking about extensively over the last year or two. And then lastly, just hands on your comments. I don't have the answer tonight, but I think breaking down this incredibly complex conversation about what we're talking about here, because boy, I'll tell you, it is what the citizens care about. If you were to measure, it's roads and sidewalks, it's infrastructure, but I think what we're talking about is incredibly complex. So it's going to be a great challenge for our communications teams to break this down into something that folks can wrap their heads around. And again, don't have the answer, but I think you hit it right on the head with that advice that you were giving us. So thank you for the report.
Sure, and if I could respond to that, I think that communication piece that you talked on last, I think the city's already there. Like, you're doing service-based budgeting.
Right.
The SODI report it reflects that service focus, right? So it's not, listen, we have fleet and facilities. Well, what's the purpose of the facility, et cetera. So I think those discussions can be underpinned by all the data that you already collected and the way you have it organized. So you're well on your way there. Yeah,
agreed. Maybe in this room in finance, and but I'll tell you, outside of this room, it's I spent countless hours online trying to explain why we can't lower taxes, build more recreation, and fix all the roads at the same time. So it's just an ongoing challenge. So thank you very much.
Any other comments, questions? Very well.
No, thank you.
I'm just looking, like, you could cherry pick any department, but just public safety, for instance. When you pull that out, obviously you're working with those respective departments in terms of the analysis that goes into determining the letter grade. Am I right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So, like, I look at that, like, some of the letter grades are surprising to me versus some of the others. Like, I mean, I look at public safety, and I'm assuming that some of those headings are just like rolling stock, like vehicles, fleet, that sort of thing, and it's at a D level. And then I I look at other things that we would get, you know, frequent complaints or requests for service, and they're graded better, like roads and sidewalks and things like that. So it's, I guess I'm just comparing the letter grade and the fact that, you know, if I didn't have the presentation, I'd probably guess based on citizen feedback that, you know, some of those things would be graded at a D, and perhaps some of the stuff in police and public safety wouldn't be a D, but it would be the B. So, but you're looking at some of the equipment that they're using, and it's graded at a, like, fire facilities are a D. You know, police fleet is graded at a D. Police machinery and equipment, that's a D minus. You know, I look at, and I guess the reason why I'm saying this, like, I look at Public Safety Communications Center, that's a D plus. Street lighting C minus. I guess over the years, like, with partnership with Saint John Energy, we put a ton into LED street lighting throughout that network. I think of the trunk radio system that we've put in, like, those are $100,000 investments. Like, we're talking millions of dollars worth of investments, and the letter grade on that is, wow, like, it's not exactly where I should be. So it's hard for me to make sense of that.
No, I understand, like, some of this, we still have some work to do on building, for example.
Okay, so is it a lack of data?
So there's a lot of lack data, like, for example, even if you go, like take an example, the growth and development, which we own the Market Square.
Certainly.
And most of our infrastructure deficit, guess where it's coming from? Market Square.
Market Square.
Which is $45 million.
All right.
Big investment, and this will break it down to zone number D or C, whatever we need here.
Okay.
So on the building side, we still have a lot of work to improve our data, and we already approved a PO or purchase order for us to go and do some real detailed condition assessment on our building, including the Market Square, including some water and sewer.
Right.
So we still have a lot of data to compile on our building to bring this number. Maybe it's gonna go higher. If we have more data, we're gonna bring it up. Now, for example, we did LBR, for example, the condition assessment on LBR. Our infrastructure came up to $2 to $3 million. However, when we work with RV Anderson to determine what are the actual condition of the building and the asset, our infrastructure deficit went from $3 million to $200,000.
Right.
So because we start looking more eyes on our asset right now, still to understand what are the risks involved in this asset.
Right.
And this is a good exercise for us to do to have a complete picture on that here.
Well, I guess it's good to see the car moving in the right direction, away from the cliff,
Yeah.
and putting it in reverse or neutral, and someone's pushing it, so, thank you.
The only thing I'd like to make comment here, I mean, the challenge we're gonna have here also, I mean, when we do the long-term financial plan, when we have all the data available, and we look at all this and how much money we have, so how, the question here, this is gonna be the challenge, what are the measures we need to do to be able to provide this sustainable level? How can we reduce this gap? And this is the challenge here, and this is the interesting part, but this is also the challenge part of it. And I'm looking forward to this phase.
Samir, how much of this is used by those respective departments in terms of their own, like some of these are agency boards or commission matters, and we provide that envelope of money. How much of this is being used to them to inform their discussion? Like, I'm not a part of those tables, so is it our hope that they use that?
No, we actually, as part of this discussion, as part of this process here, most of the staff are involved in any decision making. And also, as part of this, we have the Canada Game Aquatic Center is part of it. People for also the Saint John Police Headquarters,
Sure.
Transit Building also, Harbor Station, all are part of this team here. But the most important thing for us here, and what we're trying to push here, is for all asset group, Saint John Water Transportation, all of it, and they're doing it right now, to own the process. They need to own the process, and that's what they're doing. in order to move forward. We need to own the process. We need to make sure we follow the workflow to improve our data and then start making decisions to help us be able to reduce the infrastructure deficit, to reduce the maintenance cost, to reduce your operating cost, to reduce everything. And I believe wholeheartedly that we can meet this target here if we own this process here. And we are doing it right now.
Well, we got the best systems guy in it, so thank you. It's good. Thank you, Counselor.
All right, so before I say thank you, Samir, thank you, Hans, this has been mentioned through the process already, that I hope, as we look at these assets, okay, and I know the data is always in flux, all right, that we're taking the opportunity to look to see what we can dispose of, in the first place, all right? And secondly, the mayor mentioned it, that we're looking at opportunities to partner, and we have in the past to offset this $427 million deficit. So, thank you very kindly. I need a motion. Receive file.
Second.
All those in favor? And those opposed? Thank you so much. 4.3, a 2-year look at our general and capital budgets.
Yes,
Please, sir.
yes, thank you very much. Ask Mr. Levine. Actually, he's making his way to the podium now.
Craig's up. Great.
This is a bit of a milestone for us in terms of, we've talked about our goal of having a multi-year budget process. So I just want to distinguish between multi-year budgets and long-term financial plans. So later on, in another few months, we'll be bringing back, as part of our long-term financial plan, the 10-year capital investment plan. But also, our intention going forward in long-term is to have multi-year budgeting decisions. So tonight, this is the first time we've ever presented a draft multi-year capital budget, 2-year capital budget, both for the general fund and the utility. Tonight, we're recommending it just to be receive and file. We're looking for feedback on whether we've hit the mark or we've invested in the right areas. It's evidence-based, based on asset management, also based on your capital budget policies and priorities of council. So I don't want to steal all Craig's thunder in terms of the presentation, but with that, I'll turn it over to Craig, and we'll take questions and answers after.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Fudge. We did have a really exciting capital budget, and then Samir walked in the room and said you can't do anything new or exciting, so we'll go through it as is. So our capital budget inputs, certainly as Samir just presented and Hans, asset management plan is a big part of our capital budget inputs. We also look at all our different plans, Plan SJ, Play SJ, Move SJ, our central potential neighborhood plan. Certainly our capital budget policy is our guidelines. Now climate change is a big factor when we're looking at our capital budget. And as well, we want to focus on our council priorities as well. So I won't go through this as it was just presented, but I just want to highlight that our capital budget does focus heavily on assets that are highest risk of failure and beyond their useful life. So when we look at that letter grading system, the majority of our asset replacement will be with a letter grade F. And again, just a snapshot of our State of the Infrastructure report. So an overview. So the proposed multi-year capital budget 2020 and 2021 is just slightly under $42 million. City share is around $20 million, and that is over 2 years. Other share is just shy of $22 million, and again, that is over 2 years. And the other share consists of our gas tax funding, which also includes the additional funding that was recently announced by the federal government, the one-time top-up, as well as the disaster mitigation funding, which was just announced a few weeks ago, reserves, and bilateral funding. And this is a new program that we're just currently working on our applications. So you will see a lot of projects that we are very hopeful that we are going to get this funding, but we are in the midst of doing our applications, which are due by June 28th. And again, our projects focus on climate change, supporting growth, and infrastructure deficit. So just a pie chart of the allocation. So transportation and storm, get the largest portion of just over 20 million. And then the second one would be the Fundy Key seawall refurbishment, it's just over 8 million. And that's followed by information technology, and then our fleet, and then just various other areas. focusing on tax-based growth. So our investments, we want to look at what can we do to increase our tax-based growth as well as refurbish our assets. So funding key. So we propose in this budget that the seawall is going to be rebuilt, and that is a funding partnership with the federal government at $3.27 million, and the city share being 4.9. And again, this will be over 2 years. And the goal is obviously to transform the St. John's waterfront and develop that site. But this also allows the city to mitigate some climate change by raising the seawall. As well, some of the other strategic reinvestments we're looking at is the millage over in Milledgeville. We have a storm project for just over $1 million. And that's just to create more capacity that will allow for development. As well as we have several major street reconstruction and beautification projects along the St. James Street corridor. And this will be a focal point of the neighborhood plan. Balanced infrastructure replacement along with the climate change mitigation. So we have just shy of $9 million that is going into sewer separation. And these also result in complete street reconstructions. As well as we have $850,000 continued investment in energy efficiency projects that measures and that reduce our carbon footprint as well. And some of the infrastructure deficit highlights, as Councillor Norton pointed out, fire stations, well, we need some new roofs. So we have 3 facilities that require new roofs. Canada Games Aquatic Centre, there's some significant work that needs to be done around windows. Some exterior work like the brickwork and some interior rehab. As everyone's aware, we put a lot of money into City Market. However, on a rainy day, we still have a little bit of water coming through. So we are replacing the roof there. Carleton Community Center, some work for foundation, exterior work. Transit buses, some bus shelters. Trading Convention, again, they just have a lot of old equipment that needs to be that is outdated that needs to replace. And Harbor Station requires $700,000 in reinvestment. And I want to point out that the 2 of the items for Harbor Station, new board and glass, is about $450,000, and that's a requirement of the Q League, as well as having a Zamboni they have to replace, and that's also a requirement of the Q League to have 2 completely operational Zambonis there at all times. Again, highlighting some more infrastructure deficits. So our fleet replacement over 2 years is just over $4 million, and that is, again, all funded out of our reserves. Arena equipment, $475,000. A lot of that is safety. We, at this point, are not looking to do a lot of work until we figure out an arena strategy. So we don't want to put a lot of money into these existing arenas until we know where we're going. Information technology, 4.67. 1.67 of that is for our annual equipment replacement. Again, that's funded all out of our reserves. However, a big transformational project for the entire organization is we're looking to replace our enterprise reporting system, and that's everything from our payroll to our workflow, permits, police. So it's a huge project. It will take a few years, and it's going to have a major impact, but hopefully it'll allow us in the future to move forward with some more streamlined processes, and as well for our customers have more online capabilities, et cetera. Parking meters, again, we're just continuing. We have a replacement plan in place to replace so many parking meters every year. And Parks and Recreation, we have $325,000 for surface replacement at Marketplace Playground, and that's more of a safety issue. It's well past its useful life. And for new investments, we are making our final payment to the Exhibition Field House for $564,000. So again, I just want to note that this is not an asset of the City of Saint John. However, this was approved before our capital policy was. So in conclusion, the budget continues to focus and balance projects between addressing our infrastructure deficit, growth opportunities, climate change, addressing our infrastructure deficit, and leveraging funding opportunities as much as we can, disaster mitigation, gas tax, bilateral. And this is just a pie chart of showing the committee where our infrastructure deficit, where the money's being spent. So we have 2.42% really going into new assets and enhancements, and almost 98% going into infrastructure deficit. However, 27% of that investment in infrastructure deficit is tied to growth and hopefully creating that growth and tax base. With that, I'll have Commissioner McGovern come up and he'll present the water.
Thank you, Craig, and good evening. The proposed 2020-2021 utility capital fund is aligned with, as Mr. Levine mentioned earlier, Council's priorities, asset management plan, capital budget policy, the Central Peninsula Neighborhood Plan, and this prepares a budget as well to adapt to climate change. And this proposed two-year utility budget was prepared with input from senior leadership team, engineering, transportation, environment, growth and community development, and develop SJ. And in terms of the total proposed two-year capital budget, it's proposed to be $26,215,000. And as you heard earlier, the infrastructure deficit for the utility is very sizable at just over $300 million. Therefore, we're working hard to ensure, as part of this this two-year capital program, that we really leverage every ratepayer's dollar as much as we can by seeking funding from other levels of government. So of the $26,215,000, that makes up the two-year budget, but $10,283,000 is proposed to come from the utility, so approximately $5.1 million per year for each of the 2 years. And that money is coming from pay-as-you-go, or as we also refer to it as capital from operating. So it means that the good news is that there's no new borrowing. So we're not borrowing any further for the utility, as the committee is aware, and that's intentional to ensure we remain focused on repaying or paying down the debt that's been accumulated as a result of Harbor Cleanup Initiative and Safe Clean Drinking Water Project. I would point out, though, as Mr. Levine touched on as well, that while some of the capital projects already have committed funding from other levels of government, like the Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund that you heard announced here over the past week, and the gas tax funding, there are projects under the bilateral funding, of which there are a lot in the capital program, that are dependent upon funding through the bilateral funding agreement from the province and federal government. And so this slide just shows essentially that all of the money is really being invested into infrastructure renewal, which, as we know from the presentation earlier, is necessary given our high infrastructure deficit. And this exceeds the requirements of the capital budget policy, which requires 90% or more be invested into replacement or renewal of assets. And the utility, as I mentioned, does have a large deficit. So some would ask, how can that be, given that we've just, invested recently $100 million in harbor cleanup, and we're nearing the completion of the Safe Clean Drinking Water Project with another large investment. Well, as the committee knows, the answer is that we've built a lot of new infrastructure, and we've dramatically, as Mr. Hans or Riz mentioned, increased the service level. Treating our residential wastewater and then actually delivering water that meets or exceeds provincial and national drinking water standards. So the service levels have been attained in recent years because of the significant investments. But we do have a lot of assets that are nearing the end of their life. And so if you take, for example, and you look in the capital program, you'll see that the street renewal projects in the proposed capital program have infrastructure that dates back to the mid-1800s. There's a water main on Waterloo Street that is still servicing customers. That's from 1856. So it's those assets that are in this capital program and that we're seeking funding through the bilateral agreement for support to tackle these projects, and then also improve the streetscape, because it is a full street reconstruction. The street selection is really driven by the condition of the sewer, so how badly is the sewer collapsing, That drives the decision, and then when you have a bunch of those, it's a discussion, amongst the various other departments to ensure that we're maximizing the ROI for the city as best we can. All streets are in the PDA that are on the Utilities Capital Program for water and sewer renewal. The street reconstruction projects include full street reconstruction. And the last one listed on this slide is the 1 mile sewer lift station, and that's an important asset that it's at the end of its life, and it pumps a large portion of the wastewater in East Saint John out to the new Eastern Wastewater Treatment Facility. In terms of addressing the deficit, you see some projects here. Hayes Avenue is listed. That's an area west that currently has an old water main that runs through some wooded area, and that water main is at the end of its life. And this project that would allow for the connection of that area via a water main that's on Galt Road, making it more easily serviceable and operationally more easily to access and repair. The other infrastructure renewal section for sewer is mainly to deal with the ability to allow for tightening of the wastewater system to support growth and development, and maximize the use of existing assets so that we don't have to build new infrastructure to support growth. And fleet renewal is there, and this is really just separating the fleet renewal reserve fund for the utility on the books. And then also there's a pumping station on Prospect Street West. And moving to strategic investments, the first three projects listed here are linked to climate change adaptation, where the projects were announced last week under DMAF. With respect to cleaning and lining, we've been at that for a number of years now. And it does have significant improvements for citizens when we do get to those areas that are unlined cast iron water mains. And so this is continuing to propose that initiative, and it's the 17th and 18th phases of our cleaning and lining, but also now we're adding sewer lining, and that's really driven as a result of the video program that we began 2 years ago, where we're videoing 65 kilometers a year so that we do the entire asset inventory over a 10-year cycle. And what we're identifying is that there are some sections of sewer that need strategic investments, and so this places a small amount of money in the capital program to proactively address those to lower costs in the longer term. And
I was hungry, Brenda. Could you just put a warning on some of these slides?
While we have a large infrastructure deficit, as you can see here on the pie chart, 98% is being invested into asset renewal, and 12% of that 98% is focused on growth and preparing the community for further development. And as you can see, we're all of the assets in green are listed as infrastructure deficit condition F. So they've all failed. And some of the assets here, as I mentioned, like Waterloo Street, it's 164 years old. So it's well beyond, about 100 years beyond its serviceable life. So it's good that we can get to those. So in summary, we're trying to, attack the infrastructure deficit while being mindful of climate change, preparing and supporting for growth in the community, while at the same time working to leverage every ratepayer dollar to stretch it as far as we can without borrowing any new money. And I would note that, Mr. Riz noted earlier that we're investing about $7.5 million. And we're required to invest about $26 million. But when you look at this 2-year capital program with all the leveraged money, we're going to average $13.1 million. So it's getting us closer to where we want to be and where we need to be. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd turn it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. Any questions? Any comments? Dr. Reardon.
Let's make a quick comment. It's obviously a finance document, so, and they're using some of the tools that are available, the asset management plan. Plan SJ is older, Play SJ is older, Move SJ has some new components, and Peninsula Plan is newer, your budget policy, et cetera. But I'm assuming that all the departments put their input in, and then, because I guess I would like planning, growth and planning to have a significant voice. And the reason I say that is that this is all, we're doing this all pragmatic, based on the facts, based on what we have to fix up to get us back to where we were of our infrastructure. But I guess I would look from planning, would be the ones who would say, what's our vision of where are we going as well? So maybe those lines don't need to be relined, because maybe we're not going to be looking at growth. And I know Plan SJ would be part of that, but that needs a bit of an update. I guess my thing is what do we envision ourselves to be? Are we just rebuilding to what we were, but do we have a vision for where we want to go, and the type of city do we want to be, and not just that hard infrastructure money, but also of what's needed, but I guess of also what we should have, so that we can also become a city that can attract people, blah, blah, whatever. So, there's a bit of, I guess, pie in the sky there. I don't know what you want to call it, but I guess somewhere between those two, I see a balance of how we try to spend our money to the best that we can to get the best bang for our buck. So.
Mr. French, you want to speak to that?
I'd be pleased to.
Hamilton as well.
I guess one of the things I want to make sure that it's very important to me for this finance committee to know that this shouldn't be looked at as a finance committee or a finance department document. In terms of putting this document together, a lot of collaboration. So the commissioner of planning would be in the room, Develop SJ would be in the room, our transportation commissioner would be in the room, Saint John Water. So, I think what we're seeing is evolution in terms of our planning process when it comes to capital budgets. The governance is strengthened. We have capital budget policy. We're using evidence-based information, and we're also using principles. And one of those principles in the capital budget policy that this finance committee approved is growth being a consideration, climate change being a consideration. So a lot of those discussions were had in meetings with staff, and that's the product of what's been put into this document. So this is certainly not a document that's been put together by the finance department itself. And maybe I'll hand it over to the commissioner.
Have that feedback, because it's at the head of the finance document, so it is nice for the public to see as well.
There. Okay, through you to the councillor. It's an excellent question. I certainly, it has very much been a collaborative process with the growth perspective at the table. We recognize that really, with the $12 million limit on the capital budget, we have to use those dollars strategically to drive the growth agenda in the city. And so certainly, I've been there at the table sending the message home that you need to look at asset management through the lens of growth, and that's really why you've seen the priorities set around those key growth related projects. The St. James Street is a catalytic project in the neighborhood plan. Mr. McGovern talked about some of the investments in Milledgeville, and the funded key, of course, is another catalytic project, and it's critical. I love the way it's presented tonight with the percentage that's included that relates to growth, because with that limited budget, we have to use those dollars very strategically, looking long term on what is needed to leverage growth in our community. And I think we've struck the right balance there.
I just, thank you, gentlemen. I echo what Councillor Reardon was trying to say, and did say, thank you, that there's been a lot of collaboration here, and we've looked at, ROI, we've looked at growth, and we've looked at things like climate change, and it's all important that, and staff's all been in the room and hammered it out, and, look, I look forward to this 2-year budget. I look forward to a even longer one. Because we are going in the right direction. They are making the right, staff is helping us make the right decisions. So.
Seeing you running again?
Pardon me?
Seeing you running again?
No, did not say that. Thank you very much. Can I have a receive and file on this, please? Thank you. And second it. Thank you, Councillor Norton. All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? Thank you so much. We're getting there.
We're almost there.
Green.
Yes, I'll ask our Deputy Commissioner of Administrative Services, Mr. Fogan, to come to the, I guess he's right behind me, you can speak right behind me, to introduce this item. This is a policy with respect to our fleet, so we've brought some presentations in the past few months with respect to our community energy plan and climate change. This is a policy with respect to our fleet that we think is complementary to that process, so with that I'll hand it over.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the Commissioner stated, you've seen us present our fleet policy before. Certainly familiar with Samir's enthusiasm for our asset management policy. Just recently, we've looked at and adopted our greenhouse gas, corporate greenhouse gas policy and our energy management plan. All those have goals to become carbon neutral at some point in 2030, 2040. But these are goals, and really what we look at is, okay, a lot of places have goals. We've made declarations. A lot of communities made declarations. The question is, how are we getting there? So we do need to reduce our greenhouse gases in order to get there. So we've already completed energy reduction plans for buildings and facilities, the quick hits. The next step on those is a deeper dive. But our remaining largest emitter of greenhouse gases is our fleet. So if that's our goal, is to become a carbon neutral community, then that's something we need to look at. So you will see us come back in the future looking at applications for charging stations and electric vehicles. But this policy is around greening our existing fleet. And Kevin Lockery, our operations manager in charge of fleet, is going to present this to Finance Committee.
Good afternoon. As Ian stated, the purpose of today's presentation is to provide an update concerning fleet, review our greening, our new greening our fleet policy, the policy rollout, and to view some potential marketing samples of just the implementation that we're going to do when we do it, and hopefully to support or to seek your support for this policy. Just to give you a quick review of fleet, we have about 1,056 pieces of equipment. Of those, 304 of them are considered rolling stock, so they're licensed. You can see them broken down by class code here. One of the things that I do want to kind of hit on in this policy, we'll talk to both our rolling stock and our equipment. So we often, when you think of reducing greenhouse gases and everything, you're just talking our vehicles, but this is speaking to all of the equipment that we have as well. So that's your lawnmowers, your leaf blowers, and all of those type of pieces of equipment as well. They're often 2-cycle and 4-cycle engines, and they can be just as bad as a car. So it's important to kind of look at that. So of the remaining pieces of equipment, we have about 752 pieces of smaller equipment as well. So Common Council previously approved a new fleet policy in January of 2017, which focused on 6 key areas. One of those areas was to incorporate environmental initiatives into the vehicle and equipment asset related to daily activities to benefit the community, municipality, and environment. One such initiative is our new greening our fleet policy. The policy statement is on the screen, which we're hoping that you'll approve for us to send to Common Council later. If anybody wants to read it or no. It's important, as I stated earlier, this policy applies to our entire fleet of vehicles, but also all of our motorized equipment in use by the city, whether owned, rented, or leased for use by employees of the city in performance of their duties and the delivery of their services. To ensure a consistent approach to the greening our fleet policy, all employees operating a city vehicle or motorized equipment must adhere to the following limitations. Vehicles and motorized equipment shall never be left idling or unattended. The engine warm-up periods will not exceed 3 minutes, provided the required air brake pressure and other critical settings have been reached. Vehicles and motorized equipment will be shut off whenever idling time is expected to exceed 3 minutes. and employees are to take the most direct, safe route to their destination, so vehicles are not to be utilized for long hauling. Just an example of long hauling, if anybody doesn't know. So this is an example from Uber. In a lot of cases, taxi drivers will drive a little bit longer distance because they get more revenue, but that obviously has an effect on us from our use of gas and everything like that. So it's just trying to remind staff to go A to B, not A, B, and C in the middle of it. As with all policies, there will be situations or conditions which are not conducive to the implementation of the above limitations. The following exceptions to this policy have been identified and exist under the following circumstances. So if we are performing equipment or maintenance diagnostics, if we're in extreme weather conditions, you still want to make sure you have safe shelters for employees for their well-being. If a vehicle is not, or piece of equipment is not expected to be able to restart due to mechanical problems, while on the scene of an emergency or during training sessions, while on the scene of an emergency or while actively involved in the support function, and when the operation is required to power auxiliary equipment. So in a lot of cases, if you have a certain piece of a certain vehicle, they may have at the auxiliary, a rock breaker or whatever it is, the engine's required to actually be going for that piece of equipment to be utilized. So this policy hopefully will be reviewed every 3 years or as determined by the city manager. One of the reasons for that is the initiative that we put on the previous screen about 3 minutes and 3 minutes. It's something that we believe is attainable. Other municipalities have stricter guidelines on that, but we wanted to make sure when we initially launched the policy itself that these are attainable goals within what we're trying to accomplish. The other thing that we want to do through this policy is periodic audits as often as required to ensure that people are adhering to the policy itself. We believe that's important. And then the Green Air Fleet Policy provides essential support for forward-looking leadership, strategy, and responsible community-centered fleet management practices in the 21st century. I have a quick glossary here, so I've said some terms. If anybody has questions regarding what I'm saying, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Some fleet terms sometimes they're not as clean as people believe them to be. So when we get into the actual roles and responsibilities for this, fleet services itself will just be the administration of the policy itself. We'll be directly responsible for it. However, from the service areas, we're expecting them to be the day-to-day administrators of the policy. It shall rest with their supervisory management staff of all the departments that operate the vehicles and motorized equipment in the course of delivering their services to the public. And other frontline services. Employees are meant to serve as asset stewards and shall adhere to applicable laws and regulations as well as fleet management and safety policies, including the requirements of the Greening Our Fleet policy document. Human Resources will assist us with the integration of the Greening Our Fleet policy into the orientation of all new permanent and temporary employees and assist with communication of the Greening Our Fleet policy to employees in general through 522 safety management system as well as other on-the-job training and career field training programs. We have developed we've actually kind of borrowed this. This is the Department of Energies in the United States. They've done these policies in a lot larger scope. So we'd like to develop a logo that's similar to this to push out. And then with that, have documentation that we're pushing to staff. So you can have posters and decals that we can put on all our vehicles. And one of the other ideas is getting a keychain. So every time somebody turns that vehicle on, there's a little reminder there for them with a green leaf or something to that effect to help ensure that the policy's top of mind. So our ask is just that Finance Committee refer this policy statement to Council for adoption, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Motion's been made. Can I have a second, please? Seconded, Councilor Reardon. Thank you. Any questions for Kevin? I do a couple. Absolutely.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think your dashboard, I don't know if it was just a sort of a graphic or it was intended to sort of suggest that we will be monitoring. I guess I was reflecting on some of the metrics, right? I mean, how do you monitor this? I assume we measure fuel consumption now?
So,
And will that be one of the metrics that we would measure fuel consumption, where we are today and where we are in the future?
So in the last number of years, the city has invested in AVL systems, which are in all of our vehicles. Those AVL systems can provide us with direct information from the onboard diagnostics. So we can actually tell every vehicle how long it's idling, when it's idling.
Cool.
We can tell the routes it's taken when you refer to long hauling. We can get reports back to either supervisory staff or management staff on a daily basis, and you can run them. So we can, for example, we can tell if one vehicle has been idling for 3 minutes. We can put different thresholds on that for those reports to go back to the managers or the foreman or whatever it is, just to make sure that there isn't something that's outside of the policy realm.
Okay, wonderful. And then just to thank you very much, Kevin. Just to comment, I'm really pleased to see us go from a declaration of climate emergency to climate adaptation and mitigation plans, and to these, I don't want to call them grassroots. I mean, they're very important policies, but a whole series of actions that we've laid out for the city to be taking, and again, just very, very proud of these actions. I mean, I think a lot of folks were sort of lobbying, if you will, for the declaration, my comments were, you should be lobbying for more than just a declaration. You should be lobbying for an action plan. So I'm very proud of the city, and thanks to all the staff involved in these types of policies. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Kevin, can you remind me again? I think it was Commissioner Hugenholtz who had said in a previous meeting, how much was being spent as a result of, in the absence of this policy, how much was being spent because of idling?
So there's through the sustainability project that was put in place, they were trying to save about approximately $100,000 this year.
Right.
We have about 1.7 million that's spent on fuel on a yearly basis.
Okay.
So we're trying to reduce some of that amount down. Now, we have done some test analysis on some vehicles, and in some areas we see it as high as $200 a vehicle a month. So you could be looking at $2,400 a year on a vehicle, and if we have 300 vehicles, well, you can start doing the math. But on those initial tests, we have to make sure that we're not taking into account auxiliary equipment use and things like that. So the thought is about $100,000 what we're aiming for in the first year.
For annual savings. Excellent. No, it's a good job. Hats off. So every dollar saved is a dollar we can be using elsewhere where dollars are scarce. Good work. Thank you. Councilor?
I just want to say thanks as well. I think, saving the money is fantastic, but the whole concept of greening, I think that's the real thrust of this whole thing, for me anyway, and I think for a lot of the public. So it's a really good initiative. I just feel like this little team's on fire tonight here. So thanks again.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Well, then I'll finish it off. Thank you very much, Kevin. It's great. It's great to see us being responsible. There is a statement of purpose here. I'm going to ask that the mayor read it when it goes to open council at the next meeting, and we'll make sure it gets read there. But, I think, Mr. Mayor, with you down with those students from St. John High a week or so ago, that, we've all got to chip in and do the right thing, and this is the right thing. I'm glad the City of St. John employees are uptaking on this, so.
Just maybe take it one step further, maybe for the team to think about. I'm on your stop idling, start saving, and the keychains. I'd love to see us put a community challenge out. You see around schools, right? Please don't idle. Let's put a community challenge out to say, it's a little hot or it's a little cold here or there. I mean, but let's stop idling as a community. I'd love to see that go out a little further. I mean, just the amount of, my vehicle would tell me how many kilometers obviously I've driven, but it would also tell me how many hours the engine has run. And it always I would try to do math somehow to figure out, okay, how many hours was I sitting idling out of habit? So anyway, just for the team to think about. Thank you.
All right, there's a motion on the floor. All those in favor? Aye. And those opposed? Thank you very much, staff. Final item was an addition. I think, Kevin, you'll handle this kind of game Aquatic Center plays. I wonder if you would, can you speak on it? Can you comment on the letter, first of all?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we received a request from the Aquatic Center to reallocate some of the 2019 capital budget that they were previously approved through council. The basis for that is the Aquatic Center were able to actually apply and receive some grants from the federal government, which is very, very good news. And we encourage that kind of behavior. And with respect to that, they had provided a letter requesting reallocation for a couple of projects that really are directed towards reducing their energy consumption and better managing their water consumption. That seems to be reasonable and I guess a good use of reallocation. It is within the Finance Committee and Council's authority to, based on the capital budget policy, to allow a surplus to be reallocated to another use if so approved by you. So with that, I don't have any significant concerns with the request, but we did want to bring this to the Finance Committee and get your feedback on.
Councillor Reardon.
I'll support it because Finance is recommending it. I always have a struggle with this because the Lord Beaverbrook had money left over, right? And we didn't let them put it on to something else. So, and it's hard because I'm only just getting this and I don't know all the background and the money and all that, but I do want to encourage them, anyone, to look for monies that they can leverage for projects, therefore freeing up some of our money. So I don't, this is the yin and the yang of it, I guess. But if you're comfortable with it, with your background and looking at it, then I guess I'll support it as well.
Thank you, Councillor Reardon. Councillor Norton?
Very, very similar. So, the councillor has said, like, going forward so that we're able to just have consistency in terms of how situations like this are applied so that we're not caught perhaps applying different rules for different bodies. I'm just wondering, is there anything that we can embed in any of our working documents or our policies or how this committee does work so that I guess I just put myself on that LBR board and I think I know what I'd be saying, so I want to have consistency in terms of how we're doing this, because if we're really encouraging folks to go out there and look for this, look for these pockets of money, then we've got to be prepared that they're going to be successful, and then it means that we may have to have a change of game in terms of how we reallocate some of the funding that we've provided for them already. So is there anything we can put in policy in terms of evening that playing field or making it consistent?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So the capital budget policy doesn't provide prescriptive use on that. It really, and that was deliberate to give, I guess, council the ability to make those type of decisions. I would say that when they come before us, there's criteria in your capital budget policy. One is it put towards a infrastructure deficit of some sort. Is it conducive to growth? And for this one of the items in your capital budget policy is there a business case to do it? And they've brought forward that this will drive down consumption and energy with respect to a payback. So that's the lens that we looked at this particular request from. But there is certainly, I guess, room there for council to make those judgments, and that was deliberate.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Mayor, sure.
Yeah,
yes.
just very quickly. So supportive as well. I guess just building on both councillors' comments. I mean, I'd like to see us continue to sort of enhance these items when they come to us. So I've read the document. Where I understand what they're attempting, and be great to have just one other level of what do they expect the ROI to be. You know, we're going to invest $18,000, and we anticipate a return over 2 years, 5 years, 12 years, and I think the slight and again, sometimes I can't figure out what we own and don't own, but I think ownership of some of these this infrastructure versus non-owned, so it would be a slight differentiator for me over whether we'd be approving increased capital or not. But I'm supportive of this tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to I'd like to see it supported as well, but I should have started that in the first place. This letter was sent to me. I passed it off to staff and actually didn't talk to staff about it until this meeting. We didn't have a discussion about it because, Councillor Reardon, that's exactly what I thought, Councillor Norton, is that LBR story. The difference I thought to myself was the LBR was a work order that didn't spend all the monies instead of them going out and finding their own monies. That's the difference I saw. And you're right, Mr. Mayor, there is an ROI here, but we're not sure what it is. I mean, turning off lights, we know that the energy consumption will be down. We're not sure what it is, but it's a dollar well spent, I think. So, with that, any other comments, questions? Then I'll call for a vote to take it to council, please. And did we move that? No, we didn't. Would someone move that first?
Move that we send this to council for consideration.
Yeah, through the Finance Committee, thank you. And second it. All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? Thank you so much. That's it. Thanks, everyone. Beautiful evening out. No.
I know. Just one more thing, though. Just one more thing.
All right.
So to just real quick, we had so much, like, all kidding aside, I likely, based on my own research, there's not many people watching at home tonight. I want to thank Barbara. For being here with us tonight consistently, because we have to celebrate this good work that's happening. You know, we rely on Barbara and other members of the media. I would like us to be, considering issuing a press release after every Finance Committee meeting to highlight what we've talked about. The details matter. A lot of folks don't understand this, and I counted earlier tonight. Some have had to leave. There are 14 highly skilled, highly committed, deeply passionate staff in the room with us here tonight. And, this is day after day, night after night. And I just, how fortunate are we on behalf of the citizens to have these staff here with us? And again, we can't count the numbers of nights. So I want to say thanks to them, or to recognize them, and just that piece. Like, how do we get this information, boil it down into basic bites for folks? Because it can seem very complicated, but why it matters, I guess I just ask our commissioner to work with senior management team and communications to see if we can boil this down. We had a great night tonight, and thank you to you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership. So sorry, and I know everyone wanted to go an hour ago, but thank you.